loving you on 38.7. I'm Kristen Limon in for Hudson, who of commercial-free music for you. We got the morning music marathon going on. Plus, I'm gonna let you know how you can win some sold-out tickets to see Hosier coming up on 98.7. Don't move.
Sometimes I feel the fear of
to the world at large, since it did a marvelous job of taking her through traffic. It was honestly better than most humans she'd ridden with, which meant it would be worthwhile for both the Guild's pocketbook and society as a whole. It was possible he didn't release them because it would help society, but Dr. Mechanical had never struck Tori as that type of villain. After disembarking from the car, which she watched drive off and park itself, Tori let herself into the changing stations that separated the garage from the Guild proper. As Ivan promised, one of her apprentice costumes was waiting there. She slipped out of her work suit and into the comfortable, now familiar feel of a Guild outfit. She stepped out and was surprised to find someone waiting for her, though she likely shouldn't have been. Zalaz wrapped Tori in a powerful hug, squeezing so tightly that it almost triggered Tori's fire form before letting the softer woman go. "Are you excited?" Zalaz asked, her voice literally buzzing as she spoke. "Getting to meet your fellow rookies, sharing stories and experiences, fighting to the death to see which of you we actually keep." "I'm kind of, what the fuck?" Tori yelped, her brain catching up to her tongue midway through the reply. "Calm down, I'm just screwing with you," Zalaz said. "Come on, do you really think we'd force you all into a death match for some artificial reason? Let me meet your question with a question. Do you really want me to answer that honestly? Remember, I've already got a death threat dangling over my head." "PSHHH, we all have those at some point," Zalaz replied. "Honestly, if I don't have at least 3 people actively trying to kill me, I feel like I've pissed away a week." Tori stared at the metal woman for several very long seconds. "Okay, cards on the table. I can't tell if you're serious, being glib, or just outright fucking with me. Why pick one when all 3 seem like great options?" Zalaz crooked a finger and motioned down the hall. "Now, come on, your classmates are anxious to meet you." Moving slowly but steadily, Tori followed Zalaz down the hall. "Are they really? Like, do they know there's a 4th apprentice?" "Of course. They've got their own teachers, so each one was brought up to speed on the current situation of the Guild. They're also probably all gunning for you, since you're considered the top seed as Pseudonym's apprentice." "Fantastic. Don't suppose you'd care to even the playing field and tell me a little about them?" "Technically, since I'm a counselor, I'm supposed to be completely neutral, which includes not letting any trainees have advanced information." As Zalaz clipped through the words, it was the first time Tori had ever heard her actually sound robotic, a tone that quickly vanished when she continued. "But screw that, where's the fun in being a villain if I can't ignore some rules?" Zalaz and Tori turned down a hallway Tori had never been through before. It was largely bare, save for the usual red trim and a single dark wooden door at the end. Something static seemed to race down Tori's arm as they drew closer. Extra security, maintained by magic, technology, or probably both. At least she knew they were heading in the right direction. "Thuggernot's apprentice is a fellow lady, one who can turn into dragons from what I hear. Balam has a guy who can do magic by scratching symbols on things, which is weird even for a magic user. And lastly, Arachno Bro is training a kid who can summon swarms of insects. Have lots of fun with that one. Just seeing those things makes me glad my skin isn't soft and vulnerable like you humans." "Bleh. I might spend more time in fire form than I expected," Tori said. Insects didn't send her scurrying up the walls, but she still wasn't a fan. "Any hints as to what we're going to be doing for training?" "Sorry, even I know there are lines not to cross. Besides, Doc is way too excited about seeing the surprise on your faces for me to take that away from him." Zalaz reached out and pulled open the door, revealing a staircase that went steeply downward, obscuring whatever lay at the bottom from view. "Here endeth your guided tour. Good luck down there, and remember, don't start anything, but don't take people's crap either. Grudges run deep, as do memories of weakness." "Cheery," Tori muttered. "Thanks, though. When this weekend is done, maybe I can buy you a martini, or whatever your equivalent of booze is. You know, to show my gratitude. Taste sensors are fully equipped, so a martini works fine by me." Zalaz pointed down the staircase with a long metal finger. "Now quit stalling and get down there." With a deep breath and a long stare, Tori began her descent. No sooner had she passed the first stair than the door closed firmly behind her. She didn't need to check to know that it wouldn't budge if she tried to open it. The message was clear. Tori and the others were being put here. Escape was not an option. At least, probably not yet. Moving briskly lest anyone at the bottom mistake a slow pace for fear, Tori emerged from the staircase into a spacious room. Multiple large chairs and couches were scattered through it, and at the center was a massive table laden with food and drinks. Tasteful art hung on the walls, and an empty fireplace was set against the far corner. The whole place reminded Tori of a high-end lounge, or at least how she pictured them from movies and television. 3 other people were already in the room, each wearing a costume quite similar to her own. One was a broad-shouldered man who was helping himself to a plate of thick sandwiches that rested amid the array of food. Another was a thin, almost sickly guy who was sitting in a chair, eyes darting about the room. The final apprentice was a woman, taller than Tori and leaning against the far wall next to the fireplace. All eyes turned to her as she stepped off the staircase and into the room. To her surprise, the gazes weren't as unfriendly as she expected. The thin man gave her a courteous nod and the woman kept a neutral expression. Only the one stuffing his face had a non-subdued reaction. He set down his half-eaten meal and strode across the room. "You must be our 4th apprentice." "Damn, nice to meet you. We've all heard nothing but great things." Before Tori could react, he'd swept her hand up in his and was shaking it firmly. "Seeing as we're all technically named Apprentice at 4 now, how about you just go ahead and call me Lance? I don't see any harm in giving you a first name." Tori. "My name is Tori." She wasn't sure why she was giving out her name so easily. It was just that Lance's friendliness had taken her off guard. That was not how she had expected to be greeted by her fellow apprentices. "Tori. Well, that's a lovely name, if I do say so." The fellow over... Lady at the far end is Beverly. "Seeing as I'm sure someone with your connections already knows who we're apprenticing under, that probably gets you all the way caught up." Lance released her hand and headed back toward the table, where he waved his hand over the food. "We're supposed to eat our fill while we wait for training to start. They seem to think the food is poisoned or something, but I'm 5 entrees deep and have to say that it must be some damn tasty poison." "Feel free to ignore him," the lanky lad named Warren told Tori. "We've already begun to." Tori contemplated ignoring the food like the others, but she didn't really see the point. If they were trying to drug them, there were easier, less obvious ways to go about it. Besides, she'd had a light lunch thanks to Ivan suddenly dumping a bunch of work on her, and the food did look pretty yummy. Screw it, there are worse ways to go. She walked over and joined Lance, helping herself to some chips and chicken fingers, along with a cold soda. There was also beer in the bucket, however, that seemed to be tempting fate a touch more than she should. No matter what was coming, Tori suspected she was going to need her wits for it. If Ivan's training was any indication, whoever was waiting for them would be neither gentle nor easy. "Hey, Dad." Rick gave his father a brief hug before letting go and scurrying in the house. Ivan tried to remind himself that his son was simply at that age where being around any parental figure was, to quote, a drag. "I missed you, Dad." Beth jumped up and gave him a big hug, and Ivan took the opportunity to squeeze her tightly. Though she too had entered her teens, Rick's younger sister hadn't yet developed the inevitable impending allergy to parental affection. It would be a sad day when they both reached that point, and Ivan intended to get every drop of affection while he still could. "I missed you, too," Ivan said, finally setting his daughter down and ushering her inside. From the Jeep in the driveway, Janet gave a solemn nod to her ex-husband, which Ivan returned. Avoiding each other made keeping up a peaceful appearance much easier, especially given how much they couldn't talk about in front of the kids. Shutting the door firmly behind him, Ivan turned to find Rick sprawled out on the couch with the television already turned on, while Beth sat in a nearby chair. "I'm so sorry I had to reschedule our last visit. Did you all have fun at the theme park at least?" "Heck yeah, we went on a ton of rides," Beth said. "But we missed the freaking event of the year in town," Rick grumbled from his slouched position on the couch. "All everyone at school is talking about is that weird storm. They say a bunch of people even got superpowers from the lightning. Maybe if we'd stayed, we could have been able to fly or something. Or maybe you'd have been turned into a fly-like monster with a proboscis for a face and tattered wings for arms," I've encountered. "These accidents are very dangerous things. Not every meta is happy about what they are, you know? Progress comes with a price." Rick clicked through the channels until he came upon a documentary about NASA's newest probe being sent off in the direction of the last alien debris that had rained down on Earth. "I'm set with a regular face and arms," Beth replied. "Roller coasters beat weird chemical storms any day of the week." "And that's why she's the smart one," Ivan said. Despite his teasing tone, he actually meant it. Rick might have a knack with mathematics, but Beth was the only one of the two who seemed to realize that Metis and aliens and subterranean species weren't always good things. More than one person with a relentless interest in Metis had found their way to join the inhuman ranks, often with terrible results. Had Ivan possessed the power, he would have shielded his children against anything that might steal their humanity. Sadly, that was beyond even his exceptional abilities. Off the couch and go get ready for dinner, Ivan commanded. I've made a big enough meal that even the two of you should get full, but only washed hands get to eat. Beth took off quickly with Rick moving at a weary trudge. Ivan watched them go, then turned his attention to the remaining work in the kitchen. He glanced at the table and noticed he'd forgotten to set up plates. He quickly realized that no, he'd been right the first time. For a moment he'd forgotten that Tori wasn't in the house with them and therefore wouldn't be joining the family for dinner. It was a relief not to have to worry about her tinkering away in the basement, perhaps courting an explosion to blow up his house's foundation. But, if you were completely honest, it was also a bit strange not to have her raiding his fridge and peppering him with questions he didn't want to answer. Ivan shook off the sentiment and continued into the kitchen. There was no point in worrying about his apprentice. She was in capable hands that would give better training than he could ever hope to. Assuming said training, or the other apprentices, didn't find a way to kill her, of course. Tori was on her third bag of chips when they heard the thumping of steps coming down the staircase. As soon as the figure stepped into view, it was instantly recognizable to her, and she suspected to the others as well. Dr. Mechanical stood before them in all his metal-suited glory, spiked blowing helmet fixed firmly over his face. This was not the counselor or instructor she had met previously. This was the leader of their guild and the overseer of their future. You all have been chosen for the chance to join our organization. This is a burden we will place on you, a trust you must guard carefully, and a privilege few will ever see. Our lives are not easy, nor do we have the luxury of being soft people. Therefore, over the next few days, I will test the strength of your bodies, powers, and minds. If you can endure this hardship, you will be one step closer to true membership, and all that comes with it. From behind Dr. Mechanical, Tunnel Vision stepped into view, separating to flank their leader. The sister, who Tori suspected was Vision but had yet to confirm, stiffened as her eyes began to glow. Her twin brother, the most likely candidate for Tunnel, raised his hands and pressed them to a nearby wall. Before their eyes, the red-painted plaster disintegrated, revealing a long stretch of plains similar to the one Ivan had taken Tori to the weekend prior. Gasps came from Lance and Beverly, though Warren seemed oddly unfazed. Tori wondered if he'd already seen this trick before. Hell, for all she knew, he could do it himself. It wasn't as though anyone had been forthcoming about their powers so far. All of you, step through. Dr. Mechanical pointed to the open gateway to clarify, as though there were another place they could go. Tori bit down a sarcastic comment and followed orders, moving from the cool, air-conditioned room to a hot, arid landscape. By her guess, they were probably in the same general area where she and Ivan had trained, though the spot had messes looming over them, partially blocking out the cloudless sky. Lance, Warren, and Beverly followed suit, all three squinting as their eyes adjusted to the bright sun now glaring down on them. Dr. Mechanical followed, stepping out of the side of the cliff where the portal had manifested. Tori still wondered how they knew where to set the connecting spots up when they made these tunnels through space, though she had a theory that involved telepathy and farsight. Your test for the following days is a simple one, Dr. Mechanical informed them. Scattered throughout this area are an array of robots designed to attack you on sight. Additionally, there are hidden caches containing food, supplies, and other useful items. Your primary goal is to survive. Anyone who is so injured that they require intervention is deemed a failure. On top of that, however, there is a secondary goal. Every robot has a metallic core inside of them. One's made of copper, silver, gold, and platinum. The more valuable the metal, the more difficult the robot holding it will be to kill. Those who survive and bring back those cores will be paid for what they collected. Copper wins you $10, silver $100, gold $1,000, and one of the rare, precious platinum cores is worth $10,000. Additionally, whoever gets the most money is deemed the winner and receives 150% of their orb's value. Tori's eyes went wide. She could practically feel the excitement humming in her fellow trainees. That was a shitload of money up for grabs, all for the simple task of beating up robots. Then again, these were robots designed by Dr. Mechanical, so she'd be a fool to assume they'd go down easily. But damn. $10,000 would buy a lot of high-end tech, and no doubt the others had their own uses for such large sums of money. For training villains, cash in hand was the perfect motivation. At sunset on Sunday, you will be here, waiting for us to bring you back. Failure to do so is just that, failure. Your test begins now, Dr. Mechanical informed them, stepping back through the portal into the cool, safe room they had all walked away from. Seconds later, the window across space was gone, leaving them all staring at the plain, craggy side of a brown cliff. A smile crested Tori's face as she surveyed the landscape, wondering where those wonderful robots bent on her destruction might be hiding. The real training had officially begun. Chapter 19. Warren hunched over and began to scrawl symbols on the dusty ground. Before Tori's eyes, each one glowed as his finger traced the strange, arcane shapes into existence. When they were completed, each flashed with an emerald light before causing different effects. The first rune sent a wave of energy rippling out, washing over the 4 apprentices and continuing off in all directions. Warren's second rune solidified the dirt around it, transforming it into a green stone that he plucked from the ground and stuck in his pocket. The third and final rune conjured a green fire before burning out, leaving an arrow pointing toward one of the nearby cliffs. That should buy us a little time, Warren informed them. My blast will scramble just about any manner of detection software the robots are using. You have perhaps an hour, at best, so I suggest everyone find a safe place where they can hole up and wait this out. With orbs worth 10 grand out there. No way I'm ducking down. Lance reached out and a small swarm of flies materialized in front of his palm. The swarm grew exponentially, doubling in size every few seconds, until the sound of tiny flapping wings filled the air and set Tori's teeth on edge. At last, Lance made a small gesture and his myriad of miniature minions took to the air, scattering in every direction as they buzzed through the dry desert air. And what exactly did that accomplish? Warren asked. I'll tell you if you explain the rock and the arrow, Lance replied. Neat as both tricks were, don't any of you think that maybe we should talk strategy? Tori suggested. Seems like there's a lot of money at stake, might make sense to come up with some sort of coherent plan. The other 3 turned to stare at her with expressions that made Tori wonder if she'd somehow insulted their mothers, lovers, and honor all at once with her proposal. It was Beverly who finally spoke, voicing the sentiment that the others were clearly feeling. What strategy do we need to talk about? Everyone goes out, kills all the robots they can, and reaps what they earned. Or do you think you deserve a cut of everyone's winnings just because your teacher is on the council? The fuck? Tori jerked a hum at Warren, who did his best to look inconspicuous. His teacher, Fallon, is on the council too, not that it matters in the first place. I wasn't trying to take control or demand a cut, just pointing out that it might make more sense to work together, or at least coordinate. Think about it, 4 tiers of robot, 4 of us. Doesn't it seem like maybe we're only going to be able to take down the tougher ones working as a team? Perhaps your teacher has placed you under some serious misconceptions, Warren said. We are all training under a guild of villains, people who personify the self-reliant ideology. While some collaboration is necessary for the guild's survival, it is certainly not meant to be the focus of our training. Look at the challenge itself. Those who take the risks reap the rewards. All of it was built around the idea of us getting our own winnings. Warren, it seemed, either already had Boulam's unwillingness for teamwork or had been taught it in their short time together. It wasn't exactly a surprise to Tori. She'd hoped for better, but had expected the worst. What she hadn't expected was Beverly and Lance to nod along with the sickly thin young man, clearly on the same page. They were wrong, though. Tori had seen firsthand how much focus the guild placed on working together. The council meeting, the groups of friends, the code, all of it indicated that guild members were never entirely on their own, for better or worse. Look, I think you aren't really seeing everything about this challenge. If we coordinate with one another, so sorry that we foolish newcomers don't have your depth of perspective, Warren interrupted. But I think it's you who is missing something. No one cares what you think. We all know this is a competition, and we won't let you trick us into wasting our time so you can pull ahead. Keep chattering if you like. I for one am done listening. With that, Warren jogged away from the rest of the group and toward the direction his arrow had pointed him in. Lance looked at Tori and gave a half-apologetic shrug before heading off at a brisk pace in another direction. For a moment, only Tori and Beverly remained. I get what you were trying to do, Beverly said carefully. Thuggernold told me you probably wouldn't be as bad as the rumors made you out to be, and it seems like you really were thinking of what was best for everyone. That said, I can't work with anyone else. It's too dangerous for all of you. Tori watched as Beverly headed north. Her stomach sank as she realized how blinded the 3 of them were by their fears, ambitions, and inherited prejudices. In a way, the schism among them was her fault. These 3 weren't just new to the guild, they were new to being metahumans. To them, this was as much about testing their new abilities as it was racking up the cash, and she just stepped all over their egos by suggesting they'd need help before she even saw what they could do. Tori still didn't think she was wrong in how they should have approached the trial, but it was clear there were more diplomatic methods she could have utilized. With little other choice, she headed off in the direction no one else had, which she estimated to be south based on the sun's position overhead. Night would be coming within the next few hours, so she'd need a place to hole up and maybe some supplies to tide her over. Tori's form flickered as her flesh turned to flames, and soon she was racing across the landscape. Fire form was faster and weighed less, not to mention kept her less vulnerable, so for the moment, it was her best option to explore with. Once night fell and she'd stick out like a burning beacon, Tori would have to switch to other tactics. She just hoped she'd come up with some by the time the sun dipped below the horizon. Not the strongest of starts, Johnny noted. He, Thuggernal, Zalaz, and Gork were holed up in Zalaz's quarters, watching the apprentices scatter to the 4 points of the compass toward dangerous robotic adversaries. Zalaz had a screen that comprised an entire wall of her living room, one that could show a single picture or multiple feeds, making it the perfect place to monitor the various cameras showing the rookies as they trudged through the desert. I thought Thuggernal's girl was going to get wise and join up for a minute there, Zalaz said. Would have given those two a big damn advantage right off the bat. Sadly, Beverly is not yet confident in either her control or in another's ability to withstand her power, Thuggernal said. Against Tori, I doubt she could do much, but until she gains confidence, she'll keep separating herself and trying to work alone. She will get there in time, as we all did. Gork patted Thuggernal with a wide, stony hand, and smiled at him in a way that made people run in terror. He knew the showing of all her teeth was meant as a sign of empathy, however, and returned her kindness with a grin of his own. She has a strong heart and a good mind. Nearly trampling her family on the night she changed left a deep scar, but I believe she can work past it as her experience grows. Truthfully, I'm hopeful that losing to some of Dr. Mechaniacal's creations will show Beverly that her power does have limits. Personally, I'm hoping at least 2 of them get knocked out, Johnny said. Almost no one bet on complete drops, which means I'll make a tidy sum if they go down. You are all hard, Zalaz said. So says the Tin Woman. Can you really blame me for looking on the bright side, though? As it stands, those kids might make it through some coppers, perhaps even a silver or 2, but the minute the golds come into play, they're all toast. At least in my perspective, someone is making a little money off of it. Don't count your coins yet, Johnny, Gork cautioned. This is an interesting crop. I would be careful about assuming any outcomes until they actually happen. Johnny reached over to the table and grabbed a handful of popcorn from a bowl. Look, no one is hoping for a turnaround more than me. The better a show they put on, the more bets I'll get for the next event. I hope they all make it to the end, or at least go down fighting a platinum core. Zalaz let out a trilling, unpleasant sound. A platinum. We want them to learn, not die. With a shrug, Johnny downed his fistful of popcorn in a single bite. Guess they'd better learn quick, then. A high-pitched whine filled the air as Tori's flames melted the hovering robot's rear rotors and singed its already exposed circuitry. It managed to squeeze off a few more bolts of concentrated electricity, spraying the rocks to Tori's north with small, crackling white blasts before it finally gave out and crashed to the ground. For good measure, Tori blasted the thing with a torrent of flame until it was little more than a melted hunk of scrap. Only then did she walk over and dig into the exposed shell, working her fingers around until she produced a small orb roughly twice the size of a marble. More copper. She hadn't expected anything different. After all, this was the 3rd of the drones Tori had taken down, and the other 2 had also carried copper cores in them. As far as opponents went, they were quick and annoying, but not much of a threat to someone who could render themselves functionally intangible. There was some amount of danger. The electricity made her feel weird when it shot through her, and she assumed enough of it would cause serious problems, but overall, she could easily survive the weekend if all she had to do was pick off copper enemies. Moving carefully, Tori headed back into the small alcove she'd found along a cliff's edge. It wasn't great cover, but it did come with the oh-so-homey touch of having a cache of supplies hidden inside. It had contained meal replacement bars and bottles of water, which Tori recognized for the treasures they were immediately. There was also a scroll sealed with some strange symbol she couldn't recognize. After carefully trying to break the wax and open it, Tori decided to let the scroll be when it resisted. Ivan hadn't taught her much about magic, but one of his key lessons was not to mess with it unless she knew what she was doing. Given the context clues around the scroll, it was an aid clearly not meant for her, so she left it in the bottom of the metal box that held her discovered supplies. With the patrolling robot gone, she turned her attention to the project it had stolen her away from, digging through the weak spots in the sand to deepen her alcove. One thing living as a criminal had imparted to Tori was the importance of having a home base. She would need somewhere to stash her supplies, to hide out if things got bad, and to recover if she became injured. It would take a lot of effort, but she estimated it would be possible to build up enough dirt to cover her entrance and get some much-needed rest. There were 2 more days of this to go, and Tori assumed the first afternoon had only been a warm-up. Idly, she wondered how the others were doing. Warren was probably set. The versatility of his power almost certainly lent itself to creating a shelter. She wasn't sure he'd fare as well on a fence, though without seeing all he could do, there was no way to tell. Lance was a toss-up, as she wasn't exactly sure how his power worked. With enough insects, Tori supposed he might surround himself in a giant swarm that could serve as a shield. Beverly was the one that Tori most worried about. That dragon form of hers might be tough enough to fight Thuggernaut and therefore resilient enough to shrug off tiny blasts from the copper drone bots, but there was no way it would lend itself to a restful night of sleep. Idiots should have listened to me, Tori grumbled as her hands tore deeper into the sandy dirt pressed against the cliff. Warren could have given us shelter, Lance's bugs could have been an early warning system, and then Beverly and I could have handled anything that broke through. It was an optimistic dream, both in terms of what people could do and in assessing their willingness to work together. Still, it was a nice image to cling to as her hands shoveled the dirt. Deep down, Tori knew that her worries were also based in fear. What if she was the only one having any trouble with this stuff? What if each of the others had torn apart heaps of robots and built a shelter from their scraps? She pictured them sitting on thrones of hidden caches. The realist in her knew this was unlikely, but without a firm grasp of what each of them could do, it was impossible to rule anything out. Tori might not have cared about being the only apprentice in the guild or even the expectations set on her because Ivan was her teacher. What she did care about was the idea of losing, of slipping into last place, of failing. The dirt around her wavered. For an instant she was back in that hospital room, the endless beeping of the monitors like a drill boring through her skull. Both of them were lying there, staring at her with what little willpower over their bodies they still possessed. Then the vision was gone, and Tori realized she'd accidentally heated up her alcove by 20 degrees. She stepped out into the air. The evening was a cool contrast from the now scorching hideout, even if it did put her at higher risk of being seen by a patrolling bot. She could use a break from being alone with her thoughts, and violence didn't seem like such a bad way to clear her head. Besides, sooner or later she would have to go on the offensive. The world was a hard place. Tori Rivas knew she had to rise through it by her own force of will. She'd learned that lesson long before she was assigned to learn under Ivan. Her eyes wandered to the starry sky, a gorgeous tapestry of twinkling lights perfectly visible through the clear air. No city lights to obscure the view. Tori enjoyed the stars, not as much as when she was a child, but they still filled her with a sense of wonder to look up at them and sense her small place in the cosmos. Small for the moment, anyway. Tori was nothing if not ambitious. She turned away from the comfort of the night sky and plunged back into the alcove, determined to fortify her defense as quickly as possible. Once her home base was secure, she could turn her attention to the next step in her plan. Come sunrise, Tori was going hunting. Chapter 20. Ivan tapped his finger against the center of the mouse, not hard enough to click anything, just loud enough to cause an annoying rattle of plastic. He was on his laptop in the kitchen while his children still slumbered upstairs. If Wade ever found a way to convert teenage sleeping abilities into an energy source, he'd be able to power North America for centuries with just this generation. Glancing at the clock, Ivan decided to give them another half hour before forcibly dragging them into consciousness. The news items on his feed scrolled by, headlines that Ivan looked at without seeing. His own sleep the prior night had been restless, and as the morning sun streamed through his blinds, there was no denying the cause. Tori. He was worried about his apprentice. Guild training wasn't often intentionally deadly, but accidents had been known to happen. Wade liked to test people thoroughly, to see how they reacted in the most pressure-filled situations. True, it was a good way to see how well people kept their heads when the world was burning down around them, but it carried the sincere risk of them being caught up in the flames. Shutting his laptop firmly, Ivan got up from the table and went to his fridge to pull out some eggs and bacon. Cooking would take his mind off Tori and would hopefully help wake up his children. It wasn't as though he needed to worry about her, really. Tori was smart, strong, and had a solid ability, even if it was one she seemed dead set on letting stagnate. Pride aside, so long as she used her head, she could avoid whatever big threats Wade had put into play. Assuming she didn't get stubborn and try to pull out a win for no reason, of course. The pan sizzled as Ivan dropped the first few eggs into its burning embrace. He was trying to make himself not worry about Tori by working from the assumption that she wouldn't act prideful or stubborn. This was, to put it mildly, completely ridiculous. Turning the day's schedule over in his head, Ivan remembered that Beth was going to the pool with her friend. Rick would certainly end up walking aimlessly around the mall. There might be time to slip over to the base and check on his apprentice. Just the thought made Ivan's tension ease. He would pop over, reassure himself that his apprentice was fine, and then enjoy the rest of his weekend unconcerned. Mind made up, Ivan pulled the bacon from its package and laid it carefully in a pan before sending it to roast in the oven. Tori was thankful she had heat-based powers as the morning sun bore down on her. The others were probably sweltering by this point, unless they had an ability to block out the endless rays. An image of Lance with a cloud of flies acting as a living umbrella popped into Tori's head, and she choked back a snort. The copper cores in her pocket were already making enough noise as it was. She didn't need to draw any more robots before she was ready. Her morning's hunt had gone well, netting 4 more cores to add to her collection. She'd been keeping them on her person, which was a pain given how they would fall away during her phase shifts, but she wasn't quite ready to drop off her winnings at the alcove she'd renovated into a near-proper cave. After dispatching so many copper core robots, Tori's confidence was beginning to grow. She wasn't certain she was ready to take on a silver yet, but she'd like to at least find one. Research was as much a part of hunting as actual engagement. A loud explosion from one of the nearby messes sent Tori spinning into a crouch, a fireball conjured in each hand as she readied for attack. When none immediately came, her posture relaxed. She stared in the direction of the explosion, near the top of the mesa. Someone else must be fighting, and she'd never heard one of the copper core drones make a noise like that. Tori surveyed her surroundings quickly, wondering if there was a way she might be able to scale the cliff face quickly enough to catch the show. It was only about 30 feet high, but she wasn't exactly a practiced climber. Before she could figure out if it was worth the risk, a big, scaly green figure came into view near the mess's edge. It didn't look like any dragon Tori had ever seen, but by process of elimination, that was all it could be. The thing certainly seemed built for damage, sharp claws, powerful limbs, and a hide armored with hundreds of scales. Tori found herself thankful she didn't actually have to fight Beverly to win the contest. As quickly as the thought entered her brain, Tori saw the dragon jerked backward, flung through the air, in fact, toward the center of the mesa, out of Tori's line of sight. Even without the somehow panicked expression on Beverly's now snout-wearing face, Tori could have put the clues together. Her fellow apprentice was getting her green ass kicked. Badly, from the sounds of the scuffle that reached Tori's ears. It was very, very tempting to turn around and pretend she hadn't seen anything out of sorts, but Tori immediately dismissed the idea. Aside from the facts that Beverly had almost definitely seen her and that almost every guild member she'd met had warned her to avoid grudges, Tori just honestly didn't want to leave the woman in harm's way. This place was dangerous, and it just as easily could be her in over her head if she went the wrong way. She tried telling them there was merit in working together, now it was time to try showing. All of which was a good thought, but as Tori pulled out her copper cores and stashed them under a nearby rock, she realized her initial hurdle had yet to be dealt with. How the hell was she going to get up the cliff in time? She could practically hear Ivan's voice, telling her over and over again that exploring her power would pay endless dividends when she found herself in tough situations. Come on, there's a way up there, she muttered, staring at the sheer rock face as her physical eyes vanished in a burning wave that cascaded across her body. In fire form, she had less mass, so it was possible she could take the cliff in a series of jumps. The trouble was that she also lost almost all the strength she'd need to launch herself. Aside from burning and rolling across, Tori had limited capacity to interact with physical objects. Ivan would have told her to find a new way to go at the problem, just as he told her to try new tactics when attacking him. He wasn't even here and he was nagging her, which made it all the worse. Tori would have blasted his face with a fire beam if he'd actually shown up at that moment. In fire form, Tori could not blink, but she gave it her best shot as a rogue idea entered her head. It would be risky, no question about that, and her control would be imprecise at best. Still, there was no reason it couldn't work, as long as she kept her focus. Besides, at this point a maybe was better than nothing. Leaning forward, Tori pointed both of her arms toward the ground and began to blast the sand with twin streams of steady fire. As the dirt heated up below her, Tori focused on tightening the streams, increasing the heat while decreasing the surface area of each beam. They grew smaller and fiercer until at last Tori felt her flame feet lift up slowly from the ground. Tilting her arm slightly, she angled her rise so that it put her on course with the looming cliff where the sounds of battle still filled the air. It wasn't the fastest way to fly, but Tori still felt exhilarated as she rose higher into the air. Before, her concern had been with keeping a low profile, not letting people know what she could do. Never in her life would she have imagined soaring through Ridge City, let alone actually tried it. Yet now she was lifting off the ground, moving through the sky on no power but her own. It was thrilling, scary, and firmly confirmed what Tori had hitherto been wavering on. Her metasuit would definitely have flight capabilities. As she crested the top of the mesa, Tori finally saw the conflict she'd been listening to for the last several minutes. Beverly was lumbering about, moving as fast as her sizable body would allow while a giant silver orb on 4 thick legs tracked her every step. Metal tendrils snaked out from its right side, whipping at her thick hide and trying to wind themselves around her limbs. Beverly leapt back, clawing and snapping as they came near, then tried to turn the tables by charging her attacker. The orb's left side opened up, a whole section swiveling freely, connected by a single large arm. Though Tori couldn't see exactly what happened, she did notice the air between Beverly and the robot ripple for the span of several seconds. Beverly crashed to the ground, aborting her charge and letting out a roar of pain. She backpedaled quickly as the metal tendrils tried to capitalize on her injury. "Fuck me," she muttered. Sonic attacks on one side, big metal whips on the other. It was a good system, perfect in both a melee or ranged context while also dealing with problematic people like Tori. She wasn't sure how a concentrated blast of sound would affect her fire form, but she had a hunch it wouldn't be pleasant. On the other